Would you like to fight or to yield?
Yield.
In Bebbanburg, Northumbria, Aethelred is forced to retreat when the Scottish invaders prove too much. Meanwhile in Cookham, Uhtred is spending quality time with Aethelflaed when they are informed that she must leave since her husband Aethelred of Mercia is wondering where she is. Finan, Osford and Sietrich then arrive in Cookham and tell Uhtred about the weakened position of his uncle and that they should attack now. In East Anglia, Haston meets with Eardwulf and informs him that Canute and his army are leaving for Ireland to free Canute's cousin Sigtryggr. Eardwulf informs his king Aethelred and Eadith, Eardwulf's sister and Aethelred's newest mistress, of the news, leading Aethelred to make plans to take over East Anglia now that the Danes are leaving, not realizing that Haston has fed Eardwulf false information so that Canute's army can surprise attack Mercia and eventually Wessex. After having kidnapped his son Oswald from his church, Uhtred and his men prepare to leave for Bebbanburg and are at the last moment joined by Beocca. While on their way to Bebbanburg, Uhtred and his company locate the monks who are on their way to Bebbanburg and have Oswald join them. Having arrived in East Anglia with his army, King Aethelred finds the kingdom indeed vulnerable. Easy win, right? No. Brida and Canute and his army surprise attack Mercia and take over Aegilsburg, the capital, while Haston has been sent north away from the fighting, together with Canute's sons young Canute and Esgar. In Bebbanburg, Aelfric's son Witger arrives in his father's fort, bringing with him a fresh supply of soldiers. With Aelfled becoming queen to King Edward, Ealhswith, Edward's mother, has concerns about the increasing influence of the queen, and especially of the queen's father, the ambitious Lord Æthelhelm. Regretting her choice for Edward's wife, she locates Edward's exiled son, Æthelstan. Oswald and the monks then arrive in Bebbanburg and are allowed in the fort. That night, Oswald signals Uhtred and his men to attack, and they do so. They sneak in the fort and Uhtred holds Aelfric hostage with a knife to his throat. But using this opportunity, Witger kills Aelfric and becomes the new ruler of Bebbanburg. Witger wants to murder Oswald, but just when he fires an arrow, Beocca jumps in front of Oswald and sacrifices himself. With Beocca dead and Uhtred and his men outnumbered, they decide to retreat and escape Bebbanburg. In Winchester, Edward is informed that Aethelred has gone into East Anglia, while the Danes have invaded Mercia. With Edward unwilling to attack the Danes, Aethelflaed goes to Mercia alone to raise the army, while her mother sends Peerlik to Waelas for support. In East Anglia, Eardwulf receives word that Mercia is under attack from Canute and his Danes. Realizing he fell for Haston's lie and misinformed his king, Eardwulf kills the messenger. While on their way back, Uhtred and his company stumble upon Haston and Canute's sons. When Haston then reveals to him that Ragnar, Uhtred's foster brother, has been killed because Canute had wanted that, Uhtred takes Canute's sons as bargaining chips. Finally arriving in Aegilsburg, Aethelflaed starts raising the army and is soon joined by Uhtred. Having heard that Aethelflaed is back in Mercia, Canute sends Björgulf to capture her, not realizing that Uhtred and his sons are with her as well. Björgulf soon arrives in Aegilsburg and asks for Aethelflaed to surrender. But when he refuses to leave, Uhtred pretends to have killed one of Canute's sons. Meanwhile in Waelas, Peerlik meets with King Hywel and convinces him to join the Saxon armies against the Danes, while Eardwulf reluctantly informs Aethelred about the situation in Mercia. When Brida is about to tell Canute that she's carrying his child, she stops from doing that when Björgulf returns and informs Canute about Uhtred and Canute's dead son. Losing his mind and all tactical logic, Canute orders his men to prepare for immediate and total war, after having killed the messenger Björgulf, of course. At Tetan Hall, Aethelred, Uhtred and their men are joined by Pearlik and King Hywel and his Welsh army. They are soon met by the Danes, who headlessly charge into battle. With the battle still ongoing, Aethelred and his army finally join as well, with Edward and the Wessex army soon arriving and supporting their Christian brothers. With the combined might of all their armies, the Christians force the Danes into retreat. Uhtred then pursues Canute and confronts him about Ragnar's death. Canute admits his guilt, but is unaware that Brida has heard it, causing an unforgiving Brida who loved Ragnar to kill Canute. She is then captured by the Welshmen and taken as a prisoner. While the battle is over, Aethelred is still suffering from a major head wound and may not survive it. With the battle at Tetan Hall over, Uhtred and Aethelflaed go to her estate in Saltwich, where his daughter Seora is taking care of Aethelflaed's daughter Ælfwine and Edward's firstborn son Aethelstan. However, they soon return to Aeglisburg when they hear that Aethelred is dying. Meanwhile, the Ealdormen cannot agree on their pick for his successor, with Edward planning to marry Ælfwine to a puppet he can control, but Aethelflaed refuses to bring her daughter to Aeglisburg. Later that day, Edward proposes Eardwulf as the successor to the Mercian throne. Overjoyed, Eardwulf visits Aethelred and gives him the news, but the dying king proclaims that Eardwulf will never marry his daughter. Angered by the king's reaction, Eardwulf kills him and steals his ring. When everyone hears that King Aethelred has died, Edward orders a search for Ælfwine, while Aethelflaed tells Uhtred to take her daughter to safety. Wanting to do something good, Eadith helps Aethelflaed, with Aethelflaed telling her to locate Uhtred and have him meet her at a priory. In Saltwich, Edward's men have failed to locate Ælfwine, allowing Uhtred to take the young girl somewhere safe. Having heard rumors that Uhtred has been seen with children alongside him, Eardwulf and his men set out to track and find them. Meanwhile, Uhtred's group has met Eadith, who conveys Aethelflaed's message to rendezvous at a priory, but they miss Aethelflaed when Uhtred is forced to take a detour. Arriving in Aeglisburg, Ealhswith reveals to Edward that his firstborn son Aethelstan is also with Uhtred, since she had taken him to Aethelflaed's residence for safety. While on the road, Uhtred and his company are found by Eardwulf, who demands they hand over Ælfwine. However, Eadith betrays her brother by telling everyone that he has killed King Aethelred and was responsible for the Danes attacking a vulnerable Mercia. She proves it by having the soldiers take Aethelred's ring from Eardwulf. With his own men now against him, Eardwulf flees the scene. In Waelas, King Hywel and his brother Rhodri celebrate their victory over the Danes, with Rhodri having chained Brida as his pet prisoner. Hywel then tells his brother that he will go on a pilgrimage and puts Rhodri in charge. Soon after the king has left, Rhodri is informed that the Danes from Ireland have arrived and are heading for his head. Having left the children in a safe town, Uhtred arrives in Aeglisburg, where the Ealdormen and Edward blame each other for the precarious situation in Mercia. Uhtred then tells them that Ælfwine is safe and that Eardwulf is on the run since he has admitted to killing Aethelred. Edward demands to know where his niece is, but Uhtred refuses to share the information and is locked up and beaten. Meanwhile, Eadith decides to take Ælfwine to Aeglisburg, while Oswald and Sigtrid find Aethelflaed and inform her about her daughter. Back in Aeglisburg, Edward tells Æthelhelm to leave for Winchester and goes on to free Uhtred, offering him to be Lord of Mercia until things have calmed down, in exchange for enough men to retake Bebbanburg. Having thought it over, Uhtred accepts Edward's proposal. Æthelflaed then also arrives in Aeglisburg and is angered when she learns that Uhtred is to be made the new Lord of Mercia. In Waelas, things have turned sour for Rhodri when Sigtryggr and his Danes storm the castle, defeat him and his soldiers, and free Brida. When Sigtryggr then asks her what has become of his cousin Canute, Brida tells him that everything is to be blamed on Uhtred, the Daneslayer. While on his pilgrimage, Hywel is informed that Waelas has been attacked by the Danes. Brida tries to convince Sigtryggr to attack Wessex and Mercia, but he tells her that he doesn't want to give up their position in Waelas and gives her 5 of his men to get her revenge. However, before leaving, she decides to kill her pet prisoner Rodri by hanging him in the prison pit. In Aegilsburg, Uhtred is formally made Lord of Mercia by the Ealdorman and King Edward. But Uhtred immediately gives his crown to Aethelflaed, who with the support of the Ealdorman and eventually also her brother, becomes the Queen of Mercia. Uhtred decides to go back to his home in Cookham, and he and Aethelflaed say their goodbyes. Eadred leaves as well, and Ealhswith convinces Edward to have Aethelstan be raised in Bedwyn, and also leaves, with all three of them accompanying Uhtred and his party. Back in Wales, Brida stumbles upon Eardwulf, who gives her valuable information, while Sigtryggr leads King Hywel and his men into a trap and kills every last one of the Welsh soldiers. With Eardwulf tagging along, Brida goes back to Sigtryggr and offers him Winchester, which has been left unprotected. Seizing the opportunity, Sigtryggr and Brida take a vulnerable Winchester and capture Æthelhelm, Aelfled and Aelfweard, while Haston captures Ealhswith, Aethelstan and Stiorra from Uhtred and gifts them to Sigtryggr. Eardwulf is quick to reveal that Stiorra is Uhtred's daughter, causing Sigtryggr to develop an interest for her. With him and his army traveling back to Winchester, Edward is informed by Peerlake that the Danes have taken his capital and also his mother and firstborn son. Meanwhile, Uhtred and his company arrive near Winchester and see the town under Danish rule. Eadred then goes into the town to gather information, but instead sees her brother. Ealhswith and Aethelstan are locked up with the Queen's family, with Æthelhelm soon realizing who Aethelstan is and the danger he poses to his grandson. After Stiorra tells him that Eardwulf had killed his own king, Sigtryggr has Eardwulf killed. Witnessing her brother's fall, Eadred decides to focus on her mission to locate the royal prisoners, but is captured by Haston. Just outside Winchester, Edward and his men arrive, and despite Uhtred's advice, charge headlessly into the closed Winchester gates, with the Danes picking them off with arrows one by one. With Winchester now a month under siege, the Danes have refused to talk, until now. Tired of the siege, Sigtryggr shows Edward his heirs and offers the king one son in exchange for the retreat of the Wessex army. But Uhtred then offers himself in exchange for those two boys. Unable to refuse this tempting offer, Sigtryggr lets the boys go, while Uhtred walks into Winchester. Meanwhile, Æthelhelm bribes a guard to deliver him a poisonous flower and poisons Ealhswith for her protection of Aethelstan. Finally meeting with Uhtred, Sigtryggr tells him that he wants peace and land, and that Uhtred must arrange this with Edward. When Aethelflaed then arrives with her army, Edward tells her that he believes Uhtred to be dead, and they act on their plan to smoke out the Danes and attack. In the chaos, Haston escapes, leaving Eadred behind. With the battle going on, Uhtred manages to reach King Edward and has him and Sigtryggr stand down and negotiate. After the battle, Brida confronts and fights Uhtred, but he decides not to kill her and asks her to leave. Edward and Æthelflaed then reveal that they have given Sigtryggr Etheridge in exchange for his promise never to invade their kingdoms again. They also tell Uhtred that Stiorra is going with Sigtryggr, with Stiorra explaining to Uhtred that she goes on her own volition and wants to experience the people of her mother. While Uhtred loses a daughter, he gains a son, when Edward asks him to take care of Aethelstan since Ealhswith has been poisoned and fallen ill. While everyone is returning home, Brida gives birth to her child, all abandoned and alone.
Destiny is all.